appreciate that. Okay, here we go. So thank you again for being here and welcome. Please introduce yourself in the chat box, your name, organization, and pronouns if you prefer. I'm so thrilled to be here with you all today. So during our time together, this slide is not actually true. So closed captioning is available if you are a human that would like English to English interpretation. Go down to the bottom of the screen and select more, and you will find captioning there. And that also goes for Spanish. This webinar is recorded. I've hit record. We were hosting multiple virtual trainings about budgets during November and December, but this is the final one of that series. This link will be posted on the website for you to refer back to. And currently, the slides in both English and Spanish are available. As we go along, feel free to drop your questions in the chat and or raise your hand at the end, and we can have some dialogue about that. I am already seeing some people introduce themselves in the chat, and thank you so much. Fantastic. So let's get going. So today, some areas that we'll be focusing on is reviewing your award letter that you received for the new grant period, covering 24 months, writing a narrative for a budget, and the different subcategories within the budget template and what we're looking for to prepare your budget. So let's start this off this way though. So what did one penny say to the other penny? Let's get together and make some sense. So let's just do that. Let's try to make some sense out of the budget expectations. So we're going to start off with program elements. So you hear this during FYI Fridays, and you see it in different areas, and your CEC probably talks about this too, your CEC or your community engagement coordinator. So what are they? So program elements are funding sources that make up your award. There is a number and a name that is associated, but they mean the same thing. So we have an example on this slide. It says the name has an associated number, and then the example says commercial tobacco, PE, or program element 5003-01. Or for modernization, PE, or program element 5002-01. So
Hey Sasha.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but I saw a comment in the chat from Patty saying that you're cutting out really bad on their end. I'm able to hear you well. You get a little quieter and louder, but I can hear you well. I was wondering if anyone else was having issues hearing you.
Zach, can you hear me? This is Patty. I can hear you loud and clear. It's Sasha. If like every other 2 words she cuts out for some odd reason. Yeah.
Give me just a second. I'm gonna go on mute and I'll grab my headset and I'll plug it in so you're able to hear me a little bit better. Okay. So
thank you.
Give me just a second. More technical difficulties, everyone.
We'll get there.
How is that? Is that better, everyone?
Oh my gosh, yes, thank you so much.
So good. Absolutely. Thank you for pointing it out. No problem. Yeah, if you can't hear, what's the point? So, thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, so jumping back in, so commercial tobacco, we see the name and then the PE program element 5003-01. So that number is associated with that program name, and it's a funding source that you will find in your award letter, contract, or remit letter. So let's have a little read of that award letter. So highlighted in blue, your award for January 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2025, and then there's a number there. It's $242.51. This is your total award amount, okay? Your total award amount. And then what I have highlighted in yellow are the different program elements that make up that funding for your total award amount. So on here we see commercial tobacco, the name, the program element number. So we have the program element, both name and number, and then it's funded for $150,000. The next one on the list is adolescent and school health with the name, the number, and then it's funded $13,777. And then lastly, we see the program element modernization with the name, the number, funding $78,774. If we add those three highlighted program element funding amounts together, we will get that total award amount. So why is this important though? So we'll go to the next one. Actually, we're going to go back because we'll talk about that just a little bit more. So these three award program element amounts, we need to see three different budgets. We need to see a program budget that's designated to commercial tobacco. We need to see a budget for adolescent and school health. And we need to see a modernization budget for each separate amount. The total amount of each of these budgets should and needs to come out to be $242,551. Okay, we'll go to the next slide now. So how many budgets do you need? Well, on the screen that's farthest to the left, we have partner A, and the program elements are environmental public health and climate change, commercial tobacco prevention, and domestic wells. We see three program elements there. So we would need to see three separate budgets. The middle column is partner B, and for program elements, we see infrastructure and adolescent and school health. So we would need two separate budgets. And then the last column all the way to the right is partner C, and we can see that they are only funded under communicable disease prevention. So that would be one program element, so we would only need to see one budget. And I'm seeing that there's some things in the chat. Oh, it's just about my audio, so we're good. Okay, so we're gonna go to the next slide. So I mentioned this a couple of slides ago, but just to reiterate, so each program element needs to match the total award amount. So in the top left bubble, we see ASH, or Adolescent School Health, being funded $50,000. The top bubble on the right, we see Environmental Public Health, or EPH, in that bubble, funding $100,000. And then the final bubble that we see at the bottom of tobacco is funding $50,000. So when we add those totals up for each program element, it needs to match that total award amount in your award letter. So we heard some feedback that this table in your award letter was kind of confusing, which is why we're talking about this today. So this award letter is issuing 18 months of funding. So work plans and budgets need to show the entire 24-month AY 2025 biennium. So starting July 1st all the way through June 30th. So what this 24 months cover is, if we're taking a look at the table specifically that's on the screen, we're covering 6 months of that bridge period. We're covering 18 months of funding for the continuation period. And then if there's any unspent funds, and for this organization, they didn't have that. So those two numbers, the 67,449 plus the $242,551 total, the total award amount, which is $310,000 or $310,000. Oh, numbers today, my friends. But to piece this out a little bit more, these again are just time periods. So if we're looking specifically at the bridge period, which is the top row of this table, you might be funded under 2 different program elements during this period of time, which might be true for the other pieces of the table. It just needs to be broken out a little bit differently. So as an example, if your bridge period, which again is a time period, equals $67,449, you might be funded under commercial tobacco and modernization. So we would need to see budgets for those 2 program elements. I'm just creating a little bit of space because I said a lot of things. Okay, I'm going to continue on. And we're going to talk about all things budget. So get ready. So why do we need a budget? Why do we have you jump through these hoops? Well, it's not just for us, it's also for you too. And the importance of a good budget is so a budget is a plan that you write down to decide how you're going to spend monies. Budgets are flexible, and they can and should be a tool to guide you. And it also helps with monthly monitoring. So what do you need to prepare an informed budget? You need to know your goals, grab your work plan, a narrative, which we'll talk about in the next few slides, the budget template that our favorite fiscal people have created. You need to know what your program element amounts are and your award letter total. So how do I start? Well, excellent question. Grab your work plan because you need that. And you need to think about how much it will take. So numbers, how much will it take to accomplish the goals that you have in your work plan? And we want you to tell us a story. We want you to tell us a story about how you're going to spend the money. And that's what a budget narrative is. A budget narrative is the language or the story of the money for program activities. So it includes descriptions of expenses based on your work plan. And then within our budget template, we see these different subcategories as it's broken up. So salary and fringe benefits, office supplies, other, contracts, equipment, travel and training, and indirect rate. And we're going to tackle each one of these subcategories together. But first, narratives. So as I said, it's how you're telling the story of money for your program activities. And because we love our fiscal people, they've already built this tool into that budget template. So you don't have to have an extra piece of paper or an extra thing to submit. You can put that information right in your budget template, which is fantastic. I cannot stress the importance of this enough. So, do the budget and work plans align? And some key questions to keep in mind as you're guiding your budget and narrative is, do the budget numbers and the narratives match the activities in the work plan? And the other question is, does the narrative have details about how the costs relate to the activities? So we really need your work plan and budget to talk to each other. They should be saying the same thing. So the story that you're telling in one needs to match the story that you're telling in the other. So that's what I mean by, do they align? So what does that look like? So we're going to work through some examples as we go along, but there must be a calculation or a justification on the budget amount. So some examples. If there's a line item for food, the work plan needs to talk about that. It needs to include the purpose of what's happening, of the expense, including how many events there's going to be. So as an example, if you're hosting an event and you plan on having food at that event that you're hosting, what is the event for? How many people do you think are going to attend? And how does it align to your program activities that were approved when you got your award? So the next example, or the first example, really, it says narrative. So snacks, you want to host focus groups. We see on the slide that there are 4 focus groups. And you want to have snacks, and you're thinking $50 of snacks for how many people do you think? And that's going to equal a total of $200 for 4 focus groups. This applies for travel too. You are, you're hosting an event somewhere. It takes 60 miles to get there. What's the travel for? Why are you going there? Are you hosting an event? Is it a training? We need the details. The details are super important. And again, be sure it's tied back to your work plan. Okay, so this is the part where we're going to start to dive into those subcategories, which within the budget template. So the first one that we're coming to is salary. So FTE is talked about all the time, and it stands for full-time equivalent. Full-time equivalent, if you are full-time, you work a standard of 40 hours a week. That is represented as a percentage. So 40 hours a week equals 100%. And depending on, if you work 20 hours a week, that's 50% FTE. So that's what that means. And that's what we're asking for. Position titles. So who in your organization is supporting the goals that you have in your work plan? How many people is it going to take? Do you have interns or fellowships? Do you have volunteers? These things and these humans need to be represented within this section. So for internships and fellowships, the preference for us is that you pay them just like staff and they're on a payroll. However, we do have alternative options and they come as stipends, gift cards, and cash. Same thing with volunteer appreciation. This is where we want to see them, is within the salary, but we know that they're not going to be on your payroll because they're volunteers. So what we need to know is how many people, at what rate are you giving those stipends, gift cards, and cash? And here's an example. So this is an example straight from a budget. And what we see here is this organization thinks it only needs 2 positions to support the work for whatever program activities and goals they're accomplishing. So we see the title of their position, and one is a community care director, and the other one is an interim medical director. The next column over is the salary, their base salary without fringe, and we'll talk about fringe in a minute. So how much are they making straight up? The percentage of FTE, so this is where this organization has, believes that this interim medical director, we see them at 5.10%. So they're probably just consulting and getting some information from this interim medical director. So they don't need a lot of time from them. The community care director, which is the one above, is working more on these program goals, so it's represented in a higher percentage. Number of months we see is 24. That's already on your budget template. You don't have to do anything about that. And what's also super fantastic is if you put in the salary, the base salary without the fringe benefits, and the percentage of time that you're hoping to have them work on this grant opportunity, the math is done for you. So you don't have to worry about those numbers. They're just done. Bing, bang, boom, right there. This next slide is an example of what we would like to see if you are honoring your volunteers through gift cards, stipends, or cash. So we see that the title of position is volunteer stipends, that we are paying them $500, that it's 100% of the time. And for these volunteers, it's only 12 months that the organization needs their help. But let me point you to the bottom of the screen, because this is the extra special point, is in the narrative, we can see that it's volunteer stipends, just like we can for the volunteer or the title of position. They're being paid at $50 each. That's super key. And that there's 10 volunteers. So right there, we have a story being told of where that $500 came from. All right, fringe benefits. So what we see on the screen is what is included in fringe benefits, because some organizations don't utilize this or charge our grant for fringe benefits because they're unsure of what it includes and how it works. So from the table, we can see that Social Security and Medicare tax are included, and it's a FICA tax rate at 7.65%. It can also cover things like unemployment and workers' compensation. It can also cover medical and dental benefits, retirement, and disability. and the national average is somewhere around 30%. And so here on this next screen is the example of how this would play out in the budget template. So we have position 1 and 2 from our previous slide of the interim medical director and the community care director. Those numbers just auto-populated into these spaces. I didn't have to do anything about it. What I did have to do is write how much the fringe benefits the organization would be charging to the grant. And in this example, they are choosing to 20% is the number that feels best for this organization. And then again, the math is done for them. They didn't have to do anything. The next subcategory is equipment. So what we're looking for is describe how the equipment relates to the program activities. So for the examples given here, the top example is 2 printers. How much are those printers each? And how is it supporting the work? So from this example, we have 2 printers. We still need how much they are each. And it's going to support new outreach workers. So maybe they work from home and they are printing flyers off. You know, that's cool. We just need to know these details of how much the printer, I'll start over. We need to know what the items are, which is 2 printers, how much they are a piece, and that they are supporting outreach workers. And the next example, we see that they need 4 laptop computers. We would like a number as to how much they are a piece. And we can also see that this is also for the new outreach workers being hired. The next one we're coming to is office supplies. So in office supplies are things that help, that need to be restocked, is a good way to think about it. Typically you run out of these items because you're using them. So here we see in the include category on the left hand side of the screen, and it's printer ink, computer accessories, paper, pens, highlighters, binders, folders, and record keeping supplies. What doesn't belong in this category is postage and mailing, educational and resource materials, and copying and printing. So the things on the right of the screen, these 3 examples belong in the other category. And from one of the trainings that we did earlier, there were some questions about this. So I want to piece some of this out, and some of it was around the printing and copying. So what this looks like, the difference is if you're printing something in the office and you're using computer paper is an office supply. Computer ink is an office supply. Yes, absolutely. Include that in this category. However, if you're going to somewhere like FedEx to have some flyers printed out, that's a different beast, because you're going somewhere to have things done. And that's the differentiation in this situation. So I just wanted to highlight that for everyone. The next thing that we're coming to, or the next subcategory, is travel and training. So expenses are allowed if they're within an approved budget. The rates for that are determined are from the General Services Administration, or the GSA, and they include mileage, meals, and lodging. These expenses need to be reasonable. And what do I mean by that? My friends, we don't want to see any limos, unfortunately. You also can't have like private pools in those hotel rooms. That's what I mean by reasonable. And the subcategories within travel are per diem, hotel, airfare, registration fees, and mileage. And we'll talk about some more specific examples in the next slide. So there's a table on the left-hand side of the screen, but on the right, there's a couple questions without question marks. And the top one is, how many do you expect at an outreach event? And we'll talk about that within the example. And the other question is, how does the travel training relate to program activities? Because again, we need to know those finer details. We want you to tell us a story. So in the outreach training, in the example within the table, we can see that there are 2 trainings that this organization would like to take place. For effective outreach, we see that it's $60 per person for 2 employees, and there's 2 hotel nights stay. And we see that the hotel nights are $60 a piece. So now from that, we can get a total. And the example below, we see that this organization is hosting 3 outreach events in Baker County, and that to travel to Baker County, it's 339 miles. So we know that this 339 miles needs to be multiplied 3 times because they're having 3 outreach events. And the last one that's separated, that's down at the bottom, is training fees. So training fees, as it relates to this grant, because we want you to have training opportunities to build capacity and knowledge, but we also need to know how it applies to your goals. So it needs to be tied back to the work plan. So how many staff are going to this training? What is the cost for each of the registration fees, or if they're going to a conference, let's say. So please describe the purpose, because again, we're hoping and needing those finer details to tell the story of where the money is going. The next category that we come to is other supplies and services. So this is really tricky for people because they aren't sure what goes in here and what doesn't. And that's fair, which is why we're having this conversation. So a description of items separated and how it is used for the grant is what we're looking for in this section. Some examples of what you can find here include food and drinks, gift cards, copying and printing from a couple slides ago, postage and mailing, educational and resource materials. And here are some examples. So in this section, this organization has a bunch of things lumped together, but there's not quite enough detail in each of these examples. The story of money is not being very clear in these examples for us. So in one, the top line item, we see refreshments, gift cards, thank you notes, and postage. They did a great job because we know that it's for participating businesses and individuals in events and programming. But what we don't know is, who are the gift cards for? How much, what is the amount per gift card? Same thing for refreshments. Is this for an event? What is the calculation of this cost? So we just need those details. And the next example down, there's supplies to support youth and adult education and cessation. Well, again, it's a pretty good start of telling the money story, but like, what do you mean by supplies? What does that look like? Because is that office supplies? Because if it is, then we shouldn't see it in this other category. So we need more details. And we also need to know how it relates back to program activities. So some of this information needs to be tied back to the work plan. The last example on this slide is tobacco litter cleanup campaign, supplies and receptacles. So again, we see supplies listed on here twice without many details. We need those details. Additionally, when I did go back to this for this organization's work plan specifically, nothing at all was mentioned about this campaign. So then we have additional questions of like, well, what's happening, y'all? Like, what are you doing? So again, the work plan and budget need to be aligned, and we need you to tell the story of money. The next subcategory that we're coming to is contracts. Also, you've heard it termed as subcontracts. So please describe the services being provided. So in this example, this organization is using contracts or subcontracts for OHSU and policy advisors from universities. It's spelled out in a very explicit way with an amount associated that was agreed upon. The next way that this organization is utilizing subcontractors is through stress manager program instructors. And again, the associated amount. When I went back to that work plan to do some reviewing, it was laid out in a very easy to read way as to how these two subcontracts were helping program activities and goals. And this next slide, this is something we don't want to see. So this organization just put contractors in there with an associated amount, but why? What are these contractors for? Who are they helping? What are they doing? So a lot of questions in terms of what was being done here. So it's lacking details. Please don't do this. The next category that we come to is indirect costs, but we're going to suss out what the differences are because this is confusing for many folks. And I'm also going to say that indirect costs are called many different things, but they mean the same thing. So there's indirect costs, there's indirect rate, there's administrative overhead. Sometimes I've heard it just be called overhead. So it is many things with different names that mean the same thing. But what is the difference between direct costs and indirect costs? So direct costs are directly related to the activities or the program being funded. So, and these are all those subcategories that we talked about in the earlier slides. So salary, fringe, office supplies. I can go on, but I think you understand. Indirect costs help the agency stay open and run the program, but are not directly associated with the program itself. And we'll talk a little bit more about what this looks like in the next slide. So again, on the left-hand side of the screen, we see direct costs, which are the total items. This is staff salaries, laptops for registration at an event, outreach and engagement materials, subcontracts with a partner organization. On the right-hand column, indirect costs, and these are calculated by a percentage. These things include rent, operational costs, electricity, phone bills, internet, water, things like that. They are helping keep the doors open and running and working. So here's an example from a budget that was submitted. So as I mentioned, indirect rate is measured as a percentage. You, for this equity grant, can establish your own, or you can use your own established indirect rate. And a good range is somewhere between 10 and 20%. For this example, this organization chose 10% as the indirect rate that suited them best. But again, that range is from 10 to 20%, or you can use your own established indirect rate if your organization has one. What I'll also say is if your organization does not have one and you do not know how to establish one, please reach out to Leslie Bennett at the Nonprofit Association of Oregon, and she can do a deep dive and help you determine what is best for your organization. And I have her email at the end of these slides. So things that are not allowed. Capital equipment. What is capital equipment? Capital equipment is a high dollar purchase item on a single item. This item is typically more than $5,000. It can include things like vehicles, buildings, repairs to said vehicles and buildings, machinery like solar panels or other things. These are not allowed under this grant. Other unallowable expenses include medical equipment, so things to screen people, medical supplies like vaccines or medication, and capital improvements, which would be like repairing buildings or vehicles, the things that were on the previous slide. So those are capital improvements. More unallowable expenses. So direct payments to patients or to community members for rent, utilities, food, phone, internet. This list can continue. So it would be utilizing this public health equity grant and giving essentially cash to community members. That's not allowable. Purchasing alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. COVID-19 wraparound services, which is in a way similar to those direct payments to community members or clients. Gift cards are not to be used for the purchase of alcohol, tobacco, or firearms. And then this last slide is additional resources to support you all. So the Public Health Equity Grant website has a wealth of knowledge on there and resources for you to utilize, including these slides if you need or want them, as well as the recording, which probably won't take place until tomorrow. So don't look for the recording until at least tomorrow. But the budget template is there. What a contract boilerplate looks like, or like a template of what your contract looks like. The fiscal guidance document, which has a lovely layout of some of the stuff that we covered today, and can answer more questions potentially. Also, just as a quick aside, a new and improved one is coming up. So we'll announce it when it's out, but we're hoping that that's updated in February. And then lastly, as I mentioned, Leslie Bennett is a fantastic resource for all things nonprofit. She and her team can help do a deep dive into helping make sense of anything grants related. And so if you're really struggling with bookkeeping or understanding some of the finer details of establishing an indirect rate or whatever the case may be, please reach out to Leslie Bennett. And now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if there are any questions that I can answer. And if there's not, I'm so happy to give you some time back. So it just depends.
Oh, Sasha, this is Patty.
Hey, Patty.
Hi, how are you? I do have a quick question.
Yeah, of course. That's why I'm
I
here.
took a screenshot. I took the screenshot, so I'm looking at my phone. Okay, so where you said for printing and copying and printing for other supplies and services,
Mhm.
if we go outside of the agency, we're able to have that charge under there. But what if our system, like we have Pacific Automation, if we exceed certain copies, they bill us per page. So how do we recoup that cost?
Yeah, so that would still be in the other category because you are paying an outside entity to have that done. Does that make sense?
Yes. One more, or I don't want to take somebody else's turn.
Oh, you can ask away. There is
Okay.
time, lady. There is time.
Okay. So on for other food, where it says refreshment gift cards, and then you have the little green arrow where it says supplies to support. For our tobacco grant, we have mental health groups, and we purchase refreshments because sometimes that might be the only meal for the day for the ladies that come in once a week. Do you want details, or can we just say refreshments for the support group?
So that's a really good question. So so refreshments for support groups should be in there. So that whole sentence, because it calls out what you're purchasing and what it's for. And then we additionally are hoping for like a rough estimate of how much you think those refreshments are going to total. So is that like $50? Is
Per
that
group?
Yes, per group.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you, Sasha.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Patty. Excellent questions. Are there any other questions? The other thing is, what I'll say is, if you have a question, there is probably someone else in this space that has a similar question. So don't be afraid. We're here to learn together. I am going to stop recording just so you all know.